Welcome to today's webinar, Why Now is the Time for a Quality Management System, sponsored by ETQ. I'm Dr. Sharm, Editor-in-Chief for Quality Digest, and your host for today's webinar. With supply chain and inflation challenges lingering and ongoing economic uncertainty, businesses are being a lot more careful with their investments. The truth is, smart investments are necessary to help mitigate these economic headwinds. And the C-suite will continue to invest in solutions such as an advanced quality management system that reduces costs and increases efficiency and provides significant return on investment. In this webinar, we're going to look at what investments organizations are making and why, how an advanced QMS reduces cost, increases efficiency, and provides a compelling ROI. And we'll also take a look at some real ROI that organizations have realized from a QMS and how to conduct your own analysis, and a lot more. Before we get started, just a reminder that you can send us questions using the Q&A box. You can find the Q&A button down there in the bar towards the bottom of your screen. Just mouse down there and you'll see it. Send your questions to us as you think of them, and we will get to them after the presentation. A recording this webinar will be available one day after the webinar. You'll get an email with that information from Quality Digest, so keep your eyes open for that. And important, those of you who need a certificate of attendance, you must answer at least one of the polling questions that is presented during the webinar. Okay, let's get started. Today's presenters are Bruce Keisler, Senior Manager of Operations Chief Manager of Operations Transformation at PwC, and also David Isaacson, Vice President of Product Marketing at ETQ. Bruce is focused on the quality process and systems domain. He specializes in digital quality, QMS strategy and implementation, and business process design and implementation. His experience includes leading large-scale transformative initiatives, implementing systems for quality business processes. Prior to joining PwC, Bruce held leadership positions within operations and quality across multiple industries, including pharma and consumer markets. Also joining us, David Isaacson has more than 25 years experience in software product marketing and product management. David has successfully brought software as a service products to market for a variety of industries and high growth companies. He has worked for software companies such as Anaqua, VFA Accruent, and Oracle, where he led the product management team responsible for integrating analytics into the Oracle database. And David, I believe you are up first.
Thanks, Dirk, and welcome everybody. Appreciate your attendance and echo Dirk's welcome to everybody. It's exciting to be here today with you, and especially with Bruce as we go through a number of topics. One will be looking at industry insights. Then, as Dirk mentioned, we'll take a little bit of a look at the ROI of a QMS, and then we'll have some discussion and some Q&A at the end. So please feel free to add your questions to the Zoom widget at the bottom or the top of the screen, depending on how you have it set up. And with that, what we'll do is we'll start with the first poll question, Dirk, and then get into the presentation.
Okay, you should see your poll question up there. How are you managing quality today? And your choices are paper or manual, spreadsheets and or SharePoint, homegrown solution, and several different methods or systems. And some of you, maybe an automated QMS. So take a few minutes to answer that poll. By the way, just to repeat, if you said when you registered that you need a certificate of attendance, you do need to answer one of the polling questions that you will see during this webinar. If for some reason you don't see the polling question, or for some reason you can't click on it and answer it, that does happen now and then, just send me a Q&A. Just mention that in the Q&A, hey, I tried to answer the poll, or I didn't see the poll, or whatever. And that'll let me know that at least you at least tried, and I will note that. Okay, so we'll give you another few seconds here. Interesting. I'm sure our presenters will be interested in looking at these. It's just kind of fun. All right, let's go ahead and end the poll right now. And there are more polling questions coming up, so don't worry if you didn't answer this yet. You have more polling questions coming up. Okay, let's end this and let's share our results. All right, there you go, guys.
This is great. Thank you everybody for responding. It's spread. What does this tell you, Bruce? What do you see here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's somewhat typical from what we're seeing in the markets right now, where there's a spread, and there's certainly you can at least start to see there's at least a little bit of movement towards systems. If you reverse this poll 10 years ago, that's obviously very different. So I think there's some good trends there, but certainly surprised with the homegrown solutions. I know those can be hit or miss.
Yeah, and nearly half, about half the attendees are still using paper manual spreadsheets, which is almost manual or homegrown solutions. So that's it's a lot of manual process right now, and a lot of internal processes being used as opposed to using something more commercial. So, all right. So with that, let's jump into the industry insights. And Bruce, I'll let you take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, David. So between an increasingly digital world and a persistent operational disruptions, I think Dirk mentioned some good stuff at the beginning of the call, right? The effective use of technologies and supply chains are becoming more critical. We've seen from our recent digital trends survey that many challenges remain, and companies can do more to elevate their supply chains or quality in the digital age, as we saw in that poll as well. So as we think about what are the headwinds or even competing priorities that are being encountered, a critical few come to mind. What we are seeing is executives are continuing to focus more on basic near-term priorities and challenges in their supply chain, and less on the actions or investments that can transform supply chains and create long-term value. We asked executives what are their top priorities over the next 12 to 18 months, and what we heard is increasing efficiency, managing or reducing costs are some of the key elements they're focused on. When we look across the workforce of those executives, there seems to be a lack of digital skills in employees, and that's one of the major challenges, but also the calls to continually reinvest in digital upskilling. Then we look at the application of different technologies. There's a wide, we're seeing that the overall adoption and application are varying, as we saw in the poll. So when we think about the underlying drivers of these challenges, we have to look both externally and internally. So if we continue to the next slide. So when we think in terms of external drivers, right, we're thinking security, regulatory framework, or even the rapid evolution of technology as key drivers. Data must be secured with the redundancies in place to protect against failures, but that's also coupled with massive increases in consumer data that's available, raising concerns with data privacy or how companies are managing consumer data. From a regulatory perspective, there needs to be more education on the advancements in technology, but more challenging to that is the cost and time required to gain approval of those new technologies. One recent survey we put out showed that 66% of executives felt staying aware of the evolving regulatory framework was a major challenge. And finally, technology is rapidly evolving, right? So there's a significant cost with staying at that leading edge. When we look internally, we think about, well, remediating and updating legacy systems for those that have them, right? In keeping pace with advances in technology, it becomes cost prohibitive. From a workforce perspective, we talked about this earlier, but identifying the right training, the correct tools to be used can be challenging. A couple of numbers in our recent survey stood out. 80% of executives agree that there's a lack of digital skills within the organization, and that's surfacing some key challenges. But 73% also said there's a lack of digital tools available. When we think about time to market, right, there's this pressure to get products to market faster, which often causes incomplete investments in knowledge. There's a balance between risk, cost, and time when we're bringing products to market. And finally, just the overall investment or getting alignment on the investment in digital quality. It often competes with other high priority projects, whether that's needing to align across the enterprise on systems or funding priorities. When we think about what can be done to combat these challenges, especially from a quality lens, it starts with taking the beginning in mind, the beginning with the end in mind, excuse me. So setting tangible targets, ROI targets, can be tough, but you have to define what tangible means for you, not just in terms of combating costs, but a much broader perspective. So if we continue to the next slide. So to take a broader perspective for quality specifically, and we like to use our Quality 4.0 framework, which it supports a strong business case, right? Tying your tangible values or those quality outcomes that you see in that outer gray concentric circle to the industry challenges that allows you to put things into broader perspectives that can tie more closely in terms of the terminology of the individuals that you're having to sell a new system to, for example. So when we think of the sort of the broader quality outcomes, brand reputation comes to mind, right? Having a reputation for integrity, including how you market or sell products, services, will drive customer loyalty. And when you develop a strong brand, your customers become active promoters. And if you're operating in a highly regulated environment, bolstering the reputation with regulators can also be a critical factor. From a top line perspective, right, we want to build robust, reliable products. We want to enable that frictionless supply chain to meet and exceed sales demands. So superior quality can drive premium pricing, can drive higher margins. It can also protect or reduce against product shortages, but also can help you navigate changes in demand. And finally, cost structure, right? Reducing the total cost can help to reduce cost of prevention or the cost of dealing with both internal and external failures. Whether that's reducing testing or the time to test and analyze results by driving connectivity with systems and automation to the shop floor, or improving right first time or product yields. Ultimately, poorly managed quality leads to that higher total cost of quality. So I believe we have another poll question coming up following this, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. And what benefits do you Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Okay. Sorry, I just put up the wrong poll question. What benefits do you expect from a QMS? And we will get to this question later. Reducing the cost of poor quality, improving decision velocity, driving compliance, improving supplier quality, accelerating time to market. Sorry about that, Bruce. I thought I had the order wrong for the questions here.
No worries at all.
I'll give you guys another little bit to answer this question.
So we're going to capture this question and then we'll come back to it later, Dirk. Is that possible?
Or I can put up, or I can ask this poll question right after we get the answer to this one as well.
Okay. Let's do that.
Okay. So we'll give you guys a few more seconds to answer this one here. What do you expect from your QMS? Okay, let's end this one. And let's put up our next poll question. And I believe I can share these. I'll share those results later. Okay. And here is the ROI question that we see right there. From your experience, how have you defined a tangible return on investment for quality projects? Has it been cost, brand, or margin/revenue? And we'll give you a minute to do that. I got a question for you, I guess, Bruce, or maybe David, while we're letting people answer this question. You mentioned, Bruce, that one of the things that came out in your survey is the people talking about the lack of digital tools at their company. Does that surprise you, given kind of today's digital age where there's free tools, there's software as a service tools? I mean, the idea that a company isn't making use of digital tools that are out there does seem somewhat surprising to me. I mean, does it seem surprising to you?
So I think it can be seen in two different terms, right? There's I think there's such a thing as too much of a good thing, right? So maybe information overload, so to speak, tool overload, to where they don't know when to apply specific tools, and because of that, some of the more advanced technologies, take Gen AI for example, as we've seen, especially of late, uh, hasn't been applied in either the right ways. Now, this doesn't apply across the board, but certainly it certainly surprised us as well when we start to talk through with the executives what they're experiencing.
All right, let's put our results up there. There we go. You should see the results.
Yeah, and it's interesting
this
again.
This is partially what I
yeah.
expect.
Agreed.
Oh, go. I think when we think, and obviously we can talk more about this, but when you're thinking about defining ROI, it's also, it's important to develop that holistic perspective. So thinking in terms of costs is something we often go to, but thinking about how it can drive results that even touch the market is definitely beneficial.
Yeah, and just over half of the audience looks at it from a cost perspective, a third from a margin and revenue perspective. So really top line, bottom line, and then only a small amount, 14% of everybody on the call thinks about it from a brand perspective, which at the end of the day may, in some respects, be the most important way, depending on how you're perceived in the market.
Absolutely. I can think of a few examples where brand has increased sales, especially with I don't know, cell phones, for example. But so maybe when we're thinking about I would say of equal importance to defining the tangible results is building a foundation that will enable broader success, right? By managing quality holistically. So driving growth or cost cutting are great goals, but you have to and you should pursue those goals, but putting off other objectives can make it difficult to accomplish these. I think I mentioned earlier with our framework, and you can see it here on the slide. That's why we have a sort of a more holistic framework that integrates both culture, process, OpEx, and the digital technology piece. Ensuring that we take that integrated view for any quality transformation. So when we think about what does good look like in terms of an integrated view, I think it starts with establishing the right behaviors, as you can see here on the slide, right? You have to ensure you have that well-developed quality strategy, ensure that you're connecting what you're measuring from a KPI perspective and how you're governing your organization to that strategy. You want to ensure your reward and incentive systems are in line with driving the right decision making. And all that is aligned to that customer-centric approach, especially when you want to drive an improved brand. So you have to enable the drive for continuous improvement, right? And that starts with establishing and enabling teams to own and drive innovation, clearly defining and aligning on the right metrics and the right targets from a process and product performance perspective. from a process perspective, right, you want to have those end-to-end processes with defined handoffs, defined roles, and ensuring that you're tapping into your supplier and partner relationships to increase the value you can deliver for your organization. You have to enable automation, innovation with intuitive and connected systems, including the ability to connect in with the shop floor to automate your quality processes.
Hey, Bruce,
I talked a lot about.
Bruce, let me interrupt real quick. Can you go ahead? Your audio's breaking up, and it could be just a bandwidth issue. Go ahead and turn off your video, just in case that's okay. There we go. Let's see if that helps.
I appreciate that, Drew. Yeah, I really appreciate that. So I talked a lot about the different, external, internal factors at play earlier when deciding on the investments. I spoke briefly about tying your tangible values to the broader industry challenges and quality outcomes, and we talked about the foundational holistic perspectives to consider. But in our complex and data-rich environment we operate in, investing in the right technology for your QMS is that critical first step in a quality journey, or critical step in a quality journey. And I'll hand it over to Dave now to speak about ETQ and their experience.
Thanks, Bruce. And before you go on mute there, we did have a question from Keisler, who, back to the ROI question, would you not think that focusing on brand and or growth is more forward thinking and it covers the cost factor?
Absolutely. I mean, in my mind, there's definitely parallels between all of the elements, frankly. But I think your head's in the right spot. Exactly. So if you can, improving the brand, bolstering your brand is about bolstering your product, which ultimately can translate into cutting down those external failure costs, right? Or even in internal failure costs. So I have to agree that that's certainly a more forward-thinking approach.
All right. Excellent. Thank you. So let's talk a little bit more about ROI. We're going to dive into a little bit more now in terms of ROI of a quality management system. And it's really important to understand where quality fits into the overall organization and how it impacts across the different teams, because when you look at enterprise systems at an organization, very few of them go end to end. When you look at from the time you're thinking about designing a product to the time it's actually in the hands of a customer. And quality management is one of those areas that touches along the whole product lifecycle. So the folks who are looking at this and thinking about quality, not from the day-to-day detailed operational aspects that we think about, but more along the global organizational impacts, your C-level certainly cares a lot about what's going on there, whether it's the CEO who's looking at the bottom line and the top line and being first in the marketplace, or your operational officer, your COO, who's looking at how do we bring products to market more rapidly, how do we streamline operations, so reduce costs. From the IT side, the CIO looks at maintaining control while enabling the business, right? Security these days is so important. We hear about so many things happening on the internet, so many breaches, how many, I get emails and letters every once in a while saying your information has been breached. You now have access to a service that allows you to track your name and identity in case you have a loss. So we all get those now. It's a fact of life, and so security becomes really critical. But then there's also a lot of different systems that we use, whether they are sanctioned and purchased by the organization globally from the enterprise level, or from a departmental level, or even an individual building a little system because they need to get their job done. There's lots of these different systems out there, and all of a sudden you've got lots of information in lots of different places, and it's hard to rationalize that data, hard to merge that data, and really hard to determine what is the right source of truth. And then, of course, you've got the compliance and the quality folks who are sitting there saying, what do I do with this? How do I manage quality across the entire life cycle? How do I make sure that if there's a problem, we track it through a nonconformance, or we have a corrective action, and we get into the nuts and bolts of what a quality team manages and worries about on a day-to-day basis. And it's more than just managing that quality, but it's making sure we're compliant, whether we're in a regulated industry where there's a regulatory body that looks at us, or we're just in an industry where we want to make sure that we're complying with our customers' needs. We need to make sure that we've got the right approach and the right products in the market. And we're also ready when that customer or when that regulatory body shows up to do an audit. And how do we, at the end of the day, reduce the risk to the organization of a quality problem? And this is where you start to get into the cost of quality, and it starts to get to business value and return on investment. Because quality isn't just about saving money. If you've come to different webinars that ETQ has hosted, we are always talking about return on investment. We're talking about profit center approach and a business approach to quality, not just looking at the cost of quality, because we really are able to focus on both areas, right? Sure, we're going to save costs if we have more productive employees and we streamline operations, but we're also going to drive revenue if we have happier customers, if we are looking at our brand and it's got that reputation in the market that people are happy to buy. Review sites are all over the place. We all get caught up in them. And so we need to make sure that we are providing the right product in the market, but also faster to market. So time to market becomes critical. Bruce mentioned that earlier, that getting products into market faster means you got more revenue opportunities and a faster ramp up for acceptance in the market of our products. So that's why we need to make sure that, quality is front and center, and that we are making that investment and we're getting that return from our quality dollars as we go forward. Now, when you start to talk about where quality fits in the organization and what we think about on a day-to-day basis as quality professionals, you see a whole bunch of terms on the screen that we care about. A lot of this, when we look back at that C-level chart, that's not what they're thinking about when they look at this. They're thinking about different items. They're thinking about profit, ROI, expenses, revenues. Now, the two items on the right are one area where we overlap, because especially if you're in a public company, these things are very visible, right? Think about your annual reports, your 10Ks and your annual reports. These items are in there and they're reported on a quarterly basis, typically. So that's where it becomes really important that even though we focus on what's above, the business is going to focus on what's below. And when we think about how we can then drive not just savings and costs out of the business, but also drive revenue, that's where we as quality professionals really can make a significant impact. Now, we talked about return on investment. When you start thinking about where quality can really help drive value, recent research that we've done has shown, when you think about these key areas, reducing the risk of noncompliance, as I mentioned, if you can save 20% of your time planning and reporting on audits, that can be significant. In fact, there was one organization recently that I'm aware of that identified enough savings that they wouldn't have to hire future auditors because they could do more with the auditors they had on staff. It made them more productive. And that's not just from time spent planning and reporting, but also in supporting those audits, right? The external audits and the audit findings. Think about how much it costs to remediate an audit finding. It can be anywhere $5,000 and up to remediate a CAPA. So there's some significant cost savings in there. Streamlining operations is another area where we've seen significant improvement with a quality management system, whether that's simple stuff like managing documents or more significant with non-conformance reporting, managing customer complaints. How do you make sure that a customer who's got a complaint, it gets into the system and it's remediated, at least handled appropriately? Because that could lead to recalls and warranty costs. So there's a downstream effect there that a quality management system can help in terms of improvement on that process. Suppliers, supply chain is another key area. It typically will see anywhere between 40 and 80% of the value of a product comes from the supply chain. So managing suppliers, managing their deliveries, managing their corrective actions, making sure that you've got the right suppliers and you're able to vet them out and identify where they have problems and work with them becomes critical in that regard. A lot of that, what we just talked about, a lot of people think about, and a lot of finance departments think about those more as soft costs. But we also can look at the hard costs there. If we reduce our scrap by a small amount, it can have a significant impact on the bottom line. If we reduce our field failure costs, which means that our warranty costs go down or our recalls go down, that can be even more significant. When we talk about streamlining operations, we could also see a reduction in IT costs. I remember I talked about a lot of different systems out there doing parts of the quality management process that different groups and different people have put in place. If we reduce the footprint for IT in terms of the number of different systems they have to worry about and pay for, that can also have a significant impact. And then also finally, that reduction in inventory carrying costs, where you're not paying as much in interest because you don't have to worry about as much inventory because your yields are better, you've reduced your scrap. And what's not shown here is the impact on environmental and sustainability. Because if you're able to get higher yields, reducing your scrap, your impact to the environment is less. Your ESG reporting looks better. Your EHS capabilities are improved. You're using less energy as well in that manufacturing process per item. So a lot of benefits that go beyond just what you see on the screen. And then finally, how do you look in the market? Are you seeing increased revenue because you got a better brand or you've improved your time to market so you can drive revenue much more quickly? Now, I will just want to throw up here a few customers that we've worked with who've seen significant improvements. I'll focus on just a couple. Kimberly-Clark, they got rid of over 600 different quality management systems, and it's allowed them to streamline their operations to such a point that they're seeing an 80% improvement in release times for new products. They're able to get products into the market that much faster, and that's really significant. Or Train, they saw 32% reduction in scrap and rework. That means that they have improved their return on investment for their quality management system by a significant amount because they got rid of a huge amount of cost in their operations. So you see on and on and on how a quality management system can impact an organization in a lot of different areas. All right, so now, Dirk, this is where we wanted to hit that third.
Sure. Well, unfortunately, we
survey,
can just
poll question.
We'll just throw the results up there for you. There you go. That was from that earlier question that I fat thumbed.
Okay, I'm not seeing.
Oh, sorry. Oh,
so you're gonna. Oh, there we go. Yes. Okay. Yep. So, reducing the cost of poor quality was just under 50% of everybody on the call. Compliance was next. Those two don't surprise me. Improving decision velocity a lot less, supplier quality a lot less, time to market not so much. So I think I don't know, Bruce, if you're on here, if you have any thoughts when you look at these kind of poll results. Yeah, you may be on
absolutely.
mute.
Yeah, I was. Okay. You were correct. I was on mute there. No, look, I think it makes sense based on where a lot of the conversations I see going. But in my mind, it also speaks to where there's still some opportunity, right? So certainly some of the items like accelerating time to market, it can be tougher to estimate, right? Or it can be tougher to start to plot out what that looks like. But when we're thinking about investments, some of those elements can certainly provide a much greater business case for any technology solution, not just quality. Um, but as I would expect, I think cost of poor quality tends to sit at the forefront when it comes to especially business cases for quality systems.
Sure, it's easier to identify, and it's easier to address in a lot of respects. I see a big pile of scrap sitting in the corner. I can say, how do I improve that part of my operation? So I think it really does. It makes a lot of sense. It's the low hanging fruit in this right now in terms of where should we focus first. So I think
Exactly.
that's why you see that as the highest in this list. So and let's keep going on this. We just looked at those 5 different areas that where people think that quality can have an impact. But in terms of what we've discussed, where do you start, Bruce? What do you think in terms of how do you get started on down this path?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think in my mind, you have to keep in mind that it's a journey, right? I think it starts with outlining your specific needs and what you hope to accomplish, right? What's going to be your specific pain points or your challenges that you're currently facing that you would expect a system to help to solve, and that can go into understanding what the how you should structure your business case as well. I think that's in my mind where to start. But again, underlying that it's a journey, right? It's gonna take time, and certainly not something you can solve all at once. As we saw, quality can be pretty comprehensive when you look at all the elements it touches.
And then when you think about that, um, one of the key areas that we've been looking at a lot lately is data. Um, in terms of blockers or challenges organizations are facing with their data, what are you seeing there, and how would you recommend to folks to move that forward?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that come to mind that we see. Uh, First is actually the sheer amount of data, right? So it's understanding how to start to lay everything out or structure your data in a way that's usable. In a case where you have, say, you're going from a very manual process or paper based to a system, you start to encounter different issues, right? It's you still have data availability, but now you have it in a form that has to be transcribed or a form that has to be uploaded in some way. So I think uh, ultimately it's all about managing legacy data systems. And I think that's kind of the biggest issue we see, and that starts to creep in issues with data accuracy, right? Data integrity. We talked a little bit about security earlier, and the availability of data and how you're managing it as well. Um, for those that have systems, you start to think about the interoperability with multiple systems and how your data integrations can be built out. So those are all kind of major elements that we're seeing.
Okay. And then in terms of the risks and the benefits of integrated data, because now we're talking about grabbing data from potentially many parts um, of the organization and maybe even outside the organization. What do you see there in terms of risks and benefits?
Well, I think I'll start with the benefits first. From a benefits perspective, right, having integrated data helps with decision velocity, right? So you're able to make decisions faster, which will make you more efficient and that increase your productivity, right? And that's, I mean, that's a big selling point for any type of automation is how can I make decisions faster? So that's obviously a huge benefit of integrated data. From a risk perspective, you start to look at, I mentioned this with data security and privacy, right? You have a lot of sources of data, and some, depending on your business, you might be more at risk for data breaches or unauthorized access, but also from a data quality perspective, right? You have all these different sources, and you can, because of that, you start to see, potentials for inconsistencies or inaccuracies or even outdated information. Those are all the elements. I mean, you can also think about the technical challenges associated with it too, right? Sort of from a data mapping, data transformation perspective, and how you're moving data between systems.
Yeah. Now, how do you know what's the source of truth? Which is
Exactly.
right? Right. Okay. So I'm going to go in and look at some of the questions that have been submitted. Thanks everybody for doing that. If you have a question, please use the widget at the bottom or the top of your screen from Zoom that has the Q&A, and just go ahead and we'll start knocking off some of those questions. I'm going to try to interpret some of these, make sure I get them right. If I don't, please submit again. But looking at the question from Orlando, how can a QMS combat an enterprise's, he says, immune system and create a growth mindset? What do you think, Bruce?
Yeah, I think when I think about a growth mindset, right, I think about learning, right? And in my mind, the QMS creates a structured framework which will encourage not just continuous improvement, but a culture of learning and development. So I think that you start to really build out a strong foundation with it. I know we talked about the four different elements, right? So um, I think it also enables quality professionals to collect and analyze data effectively. So from there, you start to look at areas of opportunity. And ultimately that could lead to growth, whether that's sharing new ideas about how to use the data or sharing best practices, lessons learned.
Okay. So I'm looking at the question from Asmal now. We know that QMS deals with only systems, but here we see that cost is a major factor of ROI. Could you please explain? And I would start by saying that there are, obviously, when you do an ROI calculation, you're looking at revenue and costs, right? You're looking at what the benefit is versus what the investment's going to be. And so we need to look at cost and how a QMS can impact cost, right? So we're looking at how can the QMS, through its processes, through its capabilities, help an organization identify where there are inefficiencies, where there are issues, and reduce that by looking at corrective actions or addressing root cause analysis for some of the issues that might arise. But also, when we looked at the revenue increase, how does that also impact the bottom line? So, I mean, that's what we're looking at when we think about ROI. We're looking at both sides of the equation. I don't know, Bruce, if there's anything else you would add to that.
I think it's well covered, Dave. I think great job.
Okay. All right. So Shmuel asked, where do you see the Baldrige criteria fitting within a QMS?
I can tackle that,
Okay.
Dave. So when I think about the Baldrige criteria, right, it's I mean, ultimately think about the key components, right? Leadership, right? Emphasizing a strong leadership and governance. So obviously we see that ties directly into not only setting strategic direction for quality, but the organization as a whole, right? We talked about customer focus a lot, and that's an underlying component of the Baldrige criteria. So, whether that's aligning to your customer requirements, or ultimately ensuring your entire QMS approach is that customer centered, right? You want to drive excellence in delivery. We talked a lot about workforce engagement earlier, and that's a key component of the Baldrige criteria as well. So, whether that's engaging or developing the workforce, which is obviously we talked a lot from a digital perspective today, but it could be from a process perspective as well, right? And how to empower employees to drive continuous improvement, but also to foster an environment where they're able to learn and develop. So just a couple examples, but obviously, I see the Baldrige framework as being a very similar kind of comprehensive framework to the 4.0 framework that you saw earlier.
Okay, good. So I'm looking at a question from Dirk, and not Dirk Ducharme, who's our host for today, but a different Dirk. He said that having a QMS in place is a must in highly regulated industries. This in terms forces or induces us to have quality also in focus. Take this QMS and quality are in tandem and all the rest will follow. Would you agree? Or would you like to point on other focuses as well? I don't know if you see that question, if that's clear, Bruce.
Yeah, I think in my mind, when we talked about sort of that integrated approach, right? Digital quality, especially in today's age, right, and where we're at right now, digital quality is so critical as a next step. And in my mind, I start to see them in tandem, right? You start to struggle to have one without the other. And that's one of the reasons, I mean, we're here today talking about it, is because now is the time. And I think that with as technology continues to advance, you'll start to see more and more advantages of having that connectivity versus, say, a manual-based system or even a homegrown system. So I think there are somewhat in tandem. I agree.
Okay. Jerome had a question. Do you recommend a standard or process for implementing a QMS for an industry? And I'll start there and then toss it over to you, Bruce, as well. But typically, for most industries, and what we've seen is we like to start slow. We don't think throwing a lot of different processes into the EQMS all at once makes sense, because you're looking at how do you get success getting a quality management system implemented in an organization. Start slow, get people comfortable with using a different way of managing quality. Some of the basics, you think about document control, corrective actions, training, audits, and then growing from there. We look at this whole quality journey, if you will, of how do you start and then how do you grow? How do you then start thinking about bringing your suppliers in, or how do you start thinking about integrating with other enterprise systems such as your ERP? And so it's a stepwise process. One thing I will say is for regulated industries like life sciences, you need to start also with that part of the process, because you're going to need to be able to meet your regulatory requirements. But for me, it's a start slow, have a very steady process, and map it out as to how you're going to implement and get adoption throughout the organization. And Bruce, I'll toss that over to you if there's anything else that you'd like to add.
Yeah, I'd say there's, saying one specific kind of recipe, so to speak, is, I think every company is going to be maybe at a different place. However, at the highest level, I think to David's point, it tends to follow the same trend, right? It starts with what is the overall need. In most cases, what we've seen is the need in some areas is a lot more easier to articulate. I mean, we saw that in the polls even. than it is in others. So because of that, it just makes sense to start small and start to build and again, work the journey from there. Oftentimes, you're able to generate velocity, generate momentum by showcasing the value as it's coming through versus trying to start with the whole QMS implementation in mind. Obviously, gaining management support is critical, right? So whether that's establishing the ROI or showcasing the foundational nature of quality and what it can do for the organization, that's a key element. And then from there, it's developing that strong plan.
All right, yeah, and it's a lot of it's around the planning aspects and making sure you know what your goals are, what your objectives are, and how you're going to get there. Next question from Elizabeth. Would you speak to key elements considering integrating merger and acquisition activities into your QMS? I mean, M&A activity is really high out there, and different systems are coming in and going out of an organization all the time. So how do you manage, your core QMS versus these other companies coming in or different organizations coming in that have their own QMS systems? How do you make that all? How do you rationalize that? What would you say to that, Bruce?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a great question, right? So anytime where you have M&A, you have the joining of multiple organizations, and even some companies that are having new M&A activities happening every year, right? So we start to see definitely a very complex picture get painted as that progresses. So starting to align in your ways of working from a process perspective, I think is critical. But getting into the same system is also a critical element, right? And what we've seen, and again, it's probably not a one size fits all, but I would say one size fits most in this situation where having everyone playing in the same sandbox, so to speak, can create a lot of value. It also starts to drive consistency and it also starts to bring in from a people perspective. People are starting to operate in the same way, and they start to feel like they're part of the same organization, right? So there's a lot of variables at play when you think about from an M&A perspective.
All right, and then another question from Osmal, and this is a really, really great one. How do you identify the organizational DNA and culture around quality?
That is a fantastic question. So I think when we think about the framework we showcased earlier, right? How to identify it? I said it starts with establishing the right behaviors, but starting to identify where your organization sits. It probably starts with like a maturity type assessment where you think about, well, how are you currently establishing KPIs? How are you currently governing your organization from a process, a product perspective, and is that integrated or linked with your overall quality strategy? From a people perspective, it's so critical. How are people incentivized, or how are people engaged to think quality first, or to start putting the customer first in their ways of working? Those are all critical elements. So when we think about establishing the right culture, it starts to think about, how is my way of working going to impact our end customer, right? And those are all critical elements when you start to define what that means from an org DNA and culture perspective.
Okay. There are two questions here that actually seem to be somewhat related, and I'm going to apologize for if I butcher your names, but Akhilesh and Srinivasan both asked. One was more about the direct measure of QMS and revenue, but also when we went back to that first poll question, and brand was pretty low compared to the other items on the list, and that seems almost to be a disconnect. How do we look at QMS to revenue and brand reputation in the marketplace? How do you look at that, Bruce?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think in my mind, it starts to become, how are you serving your customer, right? Are you delivering in a consistent and a reliable way? And are you able to see, um, you know, customers being converted over at a higher rate? That could be one item. Customer satisfaction is often a score that's measured in this situation, where you have you establish these feedback mechanisms, whether it's through like a complaint system, which would be more negative, or more for like a how effective your product is for them, how satisfied are they from a loyalty perspective. All those are critical measurements. When you look at from a risk perspective, right? Ensuring that I think I mentioned this earlier with regulators, right? And developing a brand from a regulator perspective. Being able to kind of manage risk and confidence within your external those third parties coming in, whether they're auditing you or perhaps it's even potentially even suppliers coming in to audit as well, having confidence in you, right? Improving that customer satisfaction, whether it be from a supplier, regulator, or customer. And then ultimately brand advocates, right? So having customers who start to advocate for your brand. Those are all key elements for driving, improving your whether it be sales or just overall how brand translates into quality.
All right. I've got a couple questions in here that are specific to ETQ and the products, and we do provide a quality management system, and we'll get back to that individual directly in terms of the product questions. One of the things that I see here, a couple other questions. One by Anjum asks, how can we implement a risk-based QMS? Any resources, especially for a low resource country? That's an interesting one. Bruce, what do you think?
Yeah, I think. Look, you start to think about, and this would depend heavily on your sort of the market you operate in, as well as the types of products you have, right? But you start to define, well, what does this mean most for you, right? So if you're in an unregulated environment and you're solely looking at converting, positive, maybe it's that brand piece, right? Converting more sales by just having a good product reliability, then you start to sort of focus in there. But if you're in a situation where you're in a more regulated environment, there's a different set of scenarios at play that you have to decide on, that's in addition to all the others, right? So it's going to depend heavily, but certainly I will say, just as we talked to earlier, it's a journey, and it starts with, what are your current pain points? What are your objectives you want to accomplish?
Mm-hmm. All right. And then the next question, actually, I'm going to take from Nikos and from Francisco. It's, how do you involve other departments? If you've really, in terms of sometimes complex organizational structures, and you got to involve everybody, including finance, right? Because they're going to look at improvements, they're going to look at the ROI, they're going to be debating whether you make an investment in quality or something else. So your ROI has to look right. But how do you look at all of that and make sure that you're presenting a reasonable argument for this investment?
Yeah, I can take this at a high level, David. I know you
Okay.
shared quite a good
Yep.
view in some of your slides, some examples that I think speak to it very well. But I see this as translating your ROI, translating your what's tangible to you in terms of the CXO, right? Whether it's the chief financial officer, chief security officer, chief supply chain. or just from a functional perspective, right? So obviously, based on your audience, how you present might look and feel a little different, right? So from if I'm a chief supply chain officer, if I'm head of supply chain, I might consider, how am I enabling a frictionless supply chain? How can I respond to demand, or maybe how can I think about improving with my inventory turn? In terms of a CFO, they tend to speak in dollars, right? So what's the return on my capital? What's the payback period, right? So from a security or data privacy perspective, you start to look at, well, what's the risk reduction in terms of ROI, or what's the avoidance I'm getting from a new system or new technology from a breach perspective, or what are my potential continuity? How am I getting improved continuity with information or data by using this? So it's all about translating into what resonates for the audience.
Right. And I think, you mentioned before, looking at the market and even your customer satisfaction and loyalty, there's tools out there like NPS, Net Promoter Scores, and others to help identify what the market will think about this product, and how is that going to impact how the organization looks at bringing, investing in a quality management system. If you can look at that downstream impact and know what your goals are from a revenue perspective, from a cost perspective, and really bring that all together into that analysis. Last question that I have here, and it's from Joseph, and his comment is, it seems like sales and marketing sometimes dwarf the QMS. It's much more flashy in my mind, sales and marketing, and they're much more forward in terms of what their impacts are to the organization. But when I look at quality management, and I also look at like quality control, and this is what he's asking about, is, QMS looks at a very broad segment, end to end, and that's very true in terms of the product life cycle. QA, QC are subsets of that. I would agree with that, but I don't think they're independent. When you think about the manufacturing world, there's a lot of press these days and a lot of focus on the connected worker, right? Where you talk about your frontline employees on the shop floor being part of the quality management process, in addition to the quality control process, where you can capture information real time while something's being produced, get that into the quality management system. If there's an issue, take action, and then get that back to that frontline worker to make sure that they are they have the right information and are most productive in that way, and there's not a lot of downtime. So my perspective is that they are absolutely interrelated, and you have to think about them these days as holistically part of the same system. And I'll use system in a more general sense there, to make sure that you're driving quality throughout the organization. And I know, Bruce, if you have looked at a lot of connected worker or that holistic view yet, from the PwC perspective, but I'd be interested in your thoughts as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's such a critical element. So if we just take in terms of a system perspective, being able to quickly respond to issues, whether it's on the shop floor, and ultimately that starts to drive, and I see sort of the intersection of QC QA there. It starts to drive faster response times within that QA environment, but also you start to see much faster, whether it's patch release or just ultimately time to market, right? That's what we're trying to get to. We're trying to get product through right the first time, but through in an efficient manner.
All right. And Joseph came back and said that's why I use the term concentric circles, because it really is all interrelated here. So thank you, Joseph, on that. And I'd like to thank everybody who joined us today. That's it for the questions that we had out there. So I'll turn it back over to Dirk.
Yeah. And thanks, Bruce and David. I got some great comments from the audience as well. So guys, great presentation as usual. Appreciate that. And obviously, thanks to all of you out there in the audience for attending. You will be getting an email. You'll be getting two emails, actually, one from Quality Digest in about 24 hours that will have a link to a recording of the webinar so that you can share that with your friends or go back and just review it for yourself. So keep your eyes open for that. Also, you should be getting one later on, probably tomorrow sometime, from ETQ that I believe will be a PDF of the slides. So again, if you want to have those at your fingertips to review, you'll be able to do that. So from all of us here at Quality Digest and ETQ, thanks for joining us, and we will see you at the next webinar. So long.
Thank you.